Hi, nobody. I will start by saying I'm sorry about my breathing. It will probably be pretty loud and it will sound a bit weird, but I am having I've been having an asthma attack for the past few hours, so I'll try to keep it minimal at least. Today, after quite a while, not too many videos, but quite a while, I will be finally be talking about grindcore. I made this channel called Samael's Grind Show, and I haven't talked about grindcore. I've mostly talked about black metal, but finally, today is the day. Specifically, we'll be talking about subgenres with origins. I will not get too deep into anything, but I will explain a little bit of the differences because at first I thought that most of the differences on the main subgenres were lyrical completely, and that's not exactly true. To an extent, yes, but not exactly. So first we'll start with grindcore itself. It appeared throughout the mid 80s. Bands like Repulsion or Napalm Death took inspiration from both death metal and hardcore punk, crust punk, especially. I always struggle to put Repulsion as a grindcore band itself. I find they are a bit too thrashy, I would say, but they were an influence, and you can hear why they would be in the genre. I just think they are a bit primitive. It's like Possessed with death metal, where they are a bit on the fence between being death metal and thrash metal. Well, it's the same with Repulsion. Mm, um, Especially Napalm Death became known as an originator. They are considered by many people the pioneers. They took extremely fast drumming, punk influenced guitar playing mixed with some death metal techniques on both guitars and vocals, as well as drums. But drums were mostly from punk. In fact, the blast beat was an invention of grindcore. Now it's pretty much everywhere. Everything extreme metal, almost everything has at least a few blast beats, but that's when it first came. It first became known as something that you could use there. It's a derivation from the skank beat, which is a hardcore punk drum beat, which is the kick snare, and it's taking that and making it faster, and then there's all kinds of evolution from that, adding more kick, less kick, more snare, less snare, and also depending on how many cymbals you hit at the same time, it changes up a bit. There's different techniques in general, but I'm not going to get into that. Maybe someday, but there's already videos about that. It's not necessary. So we take that, and we've got grindcore by itself. Then grindcore didn't stay as the only variation possible on that for very long. Really, really early on, there were already variations on that. We can cite first gore grind, normally considered to be pioneered by Carcass, which are another British band. Grindcore is a British genre by definition. Both Grindcore and Gore Grind are from there. And Gore Grind is a bit of a tricky subject because it's grindcore with a bit more of a death metal influence. It's less punky, but it's still grindcore. It's not just death metal with a bit of a grindy thing going on. It's got also its own characteristics. It's lo-fi, but not in the same way that black metal is lo-fi. That it's that painfully high sound. Gore grind is really deep. Guitars are tuned low. Carcass tuned to a B, I think. It's atmospheric in a way, in a really noisy and not in an ambient way, more in a drone way, kind of. The guitars are really muddy, probably really thick strings. The bass is distorted, and an interesting thing that it has is that it has really deep, really low growls and some other kinds of gutturals that are really low, bring out that inhuman sound and menacing sound. And to top it all off, a lot of bands use pitch shifters on their voices to make them even lower, so you get people who already sing kind of like, and you put a pitch shifter on that and it's extremely low. It's almost like a gargling sound. Then there's this thing that started probably a lot earlier, but Gore Grind started pushing it, and then later became kind of a staple of Gore Grind, the Grindcore, and Porno Grind especially, which is the snare. And it's the idea of the tin can snare, where you take out the I don't know the name in English, but on the low side of a snare, there's normally some metallic strings. I don't know how that's called, but that gives it a very peculiar sound. So it's to take off that and have the snare really high, tuned extremely high. So it almost sounds like you're hitting a tin can. Some people really hate that. I don't really mind it. It's not my favorite thing in the world, but I get it, especially in that context where everything is from mid to low, voice and guitar and bass and the rest of the drums. Having everything that you can high gives an equilibrium, so it makes sense. It's also a bit slower than most grindcore. It's not slow. It's not really slow, but in comparison, it's a bit slow. Then we have Porno Grind, which is a direct derivation of Gore Grind. It comes straight up from there, which is a groovier version of Gore Grind with obviously porn lyrics. It's a bit more hard rock influence also, and it has the pig squeal. It's where the pig squeal kind of rose. It already existed, but in Porno Grind it's explored and used and reused. It's also slower, That's why it's a little bit more groovy. It's more riff based in a more traditional sense in terms of metal. The tin can is also there. The really low guitars are there. They are a bit more chuggy, maybe. But it's a derivation from gore grind, so it's a subgenre of a subgenre of a subgenre. Um, and then we have death grind, which is kind of an obvious one. Mm, death grind would be taking grindcore and just putting more death metal influences in there. Not traditional death metal in the vein of death or early death or maybe possessed, but more of the more extreme bands that came a bit more brutality. Lots of death grind bands are actually pretty close to brutal death metal. There's always that bit of argument that it's some bands are considered to be just death metal, some bands are considered to be just grindcore or just gore grind. Um, but there's a lot of bands that are in the middle. I will link pretty much everything that I'm talking about in the description. And finally, as a kind of final thing, there's the grindcore mixed with electronics thing, where there's noise grind that takes a lot of influence from noise and experimental music. There's not much to talk about, it's mostly improvised, it's chaotic intentionally, there's no real intention to make some kind of sense in a way. There's gore noise, which is gore grind with a lot of noise influences. There's cyber grind, which is electronic music, sometimes gabber, sometimes I don't know, IDM mostly with grindcore, any kind of grindcore actually. Um, Pornogore, that's not related to electronics, but it's kind of in between gore grind and porno grind. A lot of porno grind bands are there, kind of. And there's also the fact that most grindcore bands have a tendency to flow into the noise scene also, which makes it easy for them to have splits with noise acts, noise intros, noise outros, noise interludes. And there's this thing that's not exclusive to them, but most gore grind and grindcore bands and porno grind, especially gore grind and porno grind, and all other styles of grindcore, but especially those two, have samples from movies, from videos, from other things in general, other works of art, speeches. For example, there's the classic example of the Berserker that put fragments of speeches of mass murderers or from snuff films, and then there's lots of bands that put samples from horror films, from porn videos. There was an intro by Nuclear Vomit that was just the sound of a porn film and a pig squealing over it. And that's a whole 1 minute intro, for example. So yeah, it was a long video and I didn't explain much, but I hope it's all cleared up, at least for the people that really don't know the difference and think it's all lyrics. Aborted are not a gore grind band. That's really easy to know if you listen to gore grind at all. So yeah, Thank you very much. I will link everything in the description. I don't expect anybody to watch it, but if you watch it, thank you. And yeah, I'm sorry for my English. I'm not a native English speaker. I say that pretty much every time. I'm sorry for my breathing. I've already explained that. And I hope I will get used to talking in front of a camera someday. Bye.